We're going to check out some surprise cut candidates following mandatory minicamp, but I want to ask a question to everyone watching right now. What year did you become a Falcons fan? Let me know in the chat whether it was by birth, whether it was when they drafted a certain player you loved. It's always fun to see how long people have been fans of their team for. Welcome on into Falcons Today. Let's talk cut candidates. Now, we're not going to go through like the obvious guys that are clearly fighting for even just a practice squad spot. We'll look at those bubble players that are kind of right there on the fringe that may surprise you as someone that could end up getting cut. Now, I'm not saying all three of these guys are going to get cut or are big chances to get cut, but just players that may surprise you as, oh, I thought they would be a shoo-in. Well, maybe not. Pump the brakes a little bit. First guy we're going to look at here is outside linebacker Lorenzo Carter. Now, I don't think Carter's got a great shot at getting cut, but I do think it's a higher chance than maybe your average fan might believe. Lorenzo Carter, the last 2 seasons with the Falcons, he had a pretty good year 1 in a homecoming to the Peach State after some turbulent years with the Giants. 4 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. It was a strong year 1 for him back in Atlanta. 2023, just not quite as fruitful as his first season was. Tackles down, sacks down. Picked up a forced fumble compared to 1 interception, so we're splitting hairs at the takeaway department. But overall, his role was reduced last year. It was mostly Bud Dupree and Arnold Ebiketie coming off the edge. Now, Bud Dupree is gone. He is with the Chargers, so Lorenzo Carter is likely to take over his starting job again where he was in 2022, except if Braylon Trice starts to ascend. That was the 3rd-round pick Atlanta made coming out of Washington. One of the most effective pass rushers in college football over the last few years. Definitely one of the most productive guys when it comes to generating pressures on the quarterback. So if Braylon Trice starts to look the part of a starting outside linebacker, and let's just say he wins that role over Lorenzo Carter during the preseason, are the Falcons going to have a backup that they could save $3.75 million on? That's not earth-shattering money in the NFL, but $3.75 million isn't nothing. Like, the Falcons could move on from Carter, save $3.75 million, roll that over to next year's salary cap so they can have even more cap room to spend on other players. So there's not a guarantee that even if Carter loses the starting job, they cut him, because while the cap savings aren't nothing, they aren't like eye-popping. But I do think it's one just to have in the back of your mind of, if Trice starts to look like he's going to start opposite of Ebiketie, maybe Lorenzo Carter not only is out of a starting job, he could be out of a roster spot as well. We're going to look at 2 more roster cut candidates in just a second, but the summer of trivia continues until training camp breaks ground. So today's trivia question: Vic Beasley and what other player that was drafted by the Falcons in round 1 had at least 1 season with 10 or more sacks since 1990? It's a little pathetic that there's only been 2 players drafted in round 1 by the Falcons to have 10-plus sacks in a season. But let me know who that is going back all the way to 1990 to present day. Second cut candidate, I'm going to go with safety Richie Grant. I again, don't think this one has a great chance of happening, but that's kind of the whole point of surprise, right? They're not supposed to be obvious. Now, Richie Grant, in my eyes, has lost that starting job opposite of Jesse Bates. DeMarco Hellams took that over for him over the last couple of weeks of the 2023 season. Now, that does not mean that Richie Grant is a shoo-in to get cut, because I think we'll see a lot of 3 safety looks. Plus, Raheem Morris was very outspoken about Richie Grant and being wrong on his initial assumption of him as a player. And I think we can see Richie Grant take over as the 3rd safety. But if we see someone else on this Falcons depth chart start to outshine Richie Grant, now you've got DeMarco Hellams already taken his job. What if Micah Abernathy looks to be more than just a special teamer and he starts to steal preseason snaps from Richie Grant? Now we're looking around wondering, well, if he's not going to be a starter like Hellams, and he's not even looking like the 3rd safety, which could be someone else that takes that job over, and he's not great on special teams, what's this guy's role anymore, right? Again, a lot of dominoes kind of have to fall, but some have already started, like DeMarco Hellams taking that starting gig from him. Grant, unfortunately, kind of regressed after the 2022 season. 123 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 7 PBUs, and 2 interceptions when he was a starter. Then last season, he opens up as a starter and loses that job. So hopefully there's a bounce-back season in line for Richie Grant, and we see a lot of 3 safety looks and him flourish in that role. But I do think Richie Grant needs a strong camp. I don't think he can sleepwalk in August and just be handed a spot on the 53-man roster. If the Falcons find 2 other better safeties than him, they're likely only going to carry 4 safeties. And right now, he's probably number 3 on that list. So you can quickly see how he could fall to number 5 and be out of a job. Overall, I think Richie Grant will make this roster still, but similar to Lorenzo Carter, file that away as someone that needs to have a strong showing and can't get away with having a couple of bad preseason games and chalking it up to, it's preseason, no biggie. It's no biggie for some guys like Drake London and Bijan. It is a biggie to guys like Richie Grant. Now give me your roster bubble player. Let me know in the comment section if you think I'm missing someone or who you think is right there on the bubble of they need to put together some strong practices and games in the preseason to solidify their spot on the roster. Third and final surprise cut candidate, let's go with cornerback Mike Hughes. We saw during the spring practices that Clark Phillips appears to be the front runner for that CB2 job opposite of A.J. Terrell. So for Mike Hughes, the former first-round pick, he's going to be competing for, sure, that CB2 job, but also for that third cornerback position, right? Because right now you look at the 4 main returning corners. Terrell's got CB1 locked up. I think D. Alford is no longer just competing for the nickel job. I think he's head and shoulders above the rest of the competition for that nickel job. So now you start doing the math of, okay, if Clark Phillips is CB2, Mike Hughes kind of becomes the odd man out from the other 3 returning corners on this team, and he'll be competing with the likes of Antonio Hamilton and Kevin King and Harrison Hand, some other minor additions they've made. And for Hughes, journeyman cornerback, former first-round pick by the Vikings, you can kind of start to connect the dots as, maybe he's someone that starts to slip down the depth chart a little bit. Because the question I have is, if Mike Hughes isn't on the field as CB2, and he's not the first man off the bench, let's say Antonio Hamilton wins that job over him, well, now you look at Hughes as, okay, can you contribute on special teams? Someone answer that question for me. Can Mike Hughes contribute on special teams? He didn't have a huge role on special teams last year. And in 2024, special teams is going to have way more weight than it did last year with the new kickoff rule. So if Mike Hughes can't be a big contributor on kickoff or kick return coverage, and he's not some gunner on the punt return or kickoff team or punt team, then what's Mike Hughes' role on this team? And that's where you could see someone who went from being a competitor for CB2 to out of a job all of a sudden. All right, that trivia question we had earlier, Vic Beasley and what other Falcons first-round pick had a 10-plus sack season since 1990? Get your last guesses in the comment section below. Drum roll, please. Patrick Kearney did it 3 times with the Falcons, 2001, 2002, and then again in 2004 before going on to play for the Seattle Seahawks. Now, producer Joey Peterson was helping me with the show today, and there's a twofold trivia question. Patrick Kearney is also a very similar name to a very famous serial killer, the Highway Killer, right? Highway something? What's it called?
The Freeway Killer.
Freeway Killer.
Also known as the Trash Bag Killer.
Yeah, I had seen a documentary about him, and I never learned the Freeway Killer's actual name, which is Patrick Kearney. There's an A in between the E and the R. So he's very close to being on a no-fly list every time he flies. That would suck. All right, that will do it for us on today's show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Appreciate everyone for hanging out with us. We will sign off and see you all later.